for joining us here. I hope that your day has been productive and informative so far. This panel is here to talk about OKRs. And before we get started, I always wish that people would do this. When we say OKR, what we mean is objective and key results. And what that means in an organization may vary. We're going to talk about that. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce my panelists. We have Antonio Verardi, who is a tech lead at Yelp. We have Aniela Crisan, who is an engineering director at OLX out of Portugal. And we have Whitney O'Bannon, an engineering manager at Medium, who's based out of Austin, Texas. And so before we get going on how to OKR, I'd like for each of you to give me a couple sentences on what it is you think an OKR is. So let's start with Aniela.
Yeah, so for me, the most important thing is a framework. So if we think about how we set up goals for in a team or in an organization, basically it's a framework that needs to be understood by everybody. Otherwise, it cannot be applied correctly. And something that it's super important is the part that it's giving everybody the same language, like they talk the same language, they all think about the same thing. They think about the impact. They give it gives focus. It gives direction. And another super important thing it gives you the opportunity to stretch and to become better.
Excellent. Whitney, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So OKRs for me are a very useful tool in preventing burnout, believe it or not. When there's a very clear objective and goal, which the whole team is trying to move towards, it can create a level of engagement and excitement and motivation about getting the work done. So it helps avoid that resting on our laurels and complacent feeling that we're just running up and down the field and not knowing when we're scoring. So it's a very effective tool in providing motivation and inspiration as well as alignment, like Aniela said.
Antonio?
As Aniela said, for me, they're mostly a tool, a framework to track and define goals and to communicate them across the company. Only that.
That sounds good. So it sounds to me like what we're saying is that they are a tool to align team goals and to define what done is or what good enough is, which helps prevent burnout because, like in the last panel about interviewing, it's really important to set expectations about what you want from people. Would you say that's a fair summary?
Yeah.
Okay. So who drives OKRs in your organization? Is this something that an engineer and a manager would write together? Is this something that starts at the top level and trickles down? How does that get organized in your organization, and how do you feel about that? Let's start with Whitney.
So I love to speak about this topic, specifically OKRs being bottom up. I gave a talk at LeadDev London last year about bottom up OKRs. So I do think it is something that the team comes up with together at a team level. In order for that to successfully happen, there needs to be an explicitly clear objective of the organization or the company. Otherwise, the bottom up OKRs kind of fall apart. So I think it's something that managers work directly with their teams to establish in order to feed into the larger company objective, whatever that may be. So I'm a fan of bottom up OKRs that align to higher level company objectives.
Antonio?
I agree with Whitney 100%. Like at Yelp, we do the same thing. So there are objectives that the company set, and then every team has a draft document where every quarter they draft the OKRs for the quarter. It's mostly the managers, the tech leads that participate to that, but the whole team is involved. So anyone can comment, propose, and other teams also come in and just give suggestions or ask for things. So it's a team effort, as Whitney said, and I really like it that way.
How about you, Aniela?
Well, OLX, it's a global company, so we are split in customer units that actually have people that sit in different locations. So it's the product and data team that it's based in Portugal, but then there are like different people that are sitting in different countries where we also have the product. So when we design the OKRs, we start to design the OKRs for the whole customer unit, and then each team inside they have a mission. So then they create their own based on the OKRs that are present for the whole unit. So when they create this objective, needs to be aligned with their team mission plus the company ones, and then of course that whoever really defines, and they define the how they measure and everything. It's the team itself that it's actually working on it, because you cannot be involved 100% in something if you don't if you are not involved also in creating it. And the team becomes way more motivated when they are the ones that are creating their goals. They are the ones that are figuring out how they're going to measure that. So they're owning the experience from end to end. So it's a mix of things. Like you need to be you cannot be really very, very autonomous, because you're still in the bigger organization. So you need to be global, but then also to optimize for your team.
That makes sense. So what I'm hearing is that no matter where the OKR starts, it's really important that it be written and driven by the team rather than imposed on them. Would you say that's a fair understanding of it?
Definitely.
So when we're talking about an OKR, how do we know what kinds of OKRs are effective? Like, what is the template for an OKR? What makes it good, and how do you know if it succeeded? Let's go with Antonio.
I have a short checklist of 6 items that I use for like a TDD approach to OKR. So I write one and then I go through the checklist. If it doesn't check all of them, then I rewrite it and so on. I wrote it on a blog post. I can post a link on the Slack channel afterwards. But basically, a good key result for me needs to track the objective that is related to, of course. It needs to deliver value. Another important thing is that it needs to be objectively measurable, which is something that a lot of people forget. Another thing is that it should be more or less resilient to scope change. So it shouldn't commit to a specific solution. For example, deploying Memcache in front of the emoji service, that is not a very effective one, because if in 2 months from now you decide Redis is a better tool, then you will score 0 into the OKR, but at the end you will have achieved the goal. Also, it can be a block for innovation, because maybe engineers in your team won't even think about using Redis, right? Because you already commit to Memcache. Another thing is that it would be great if OKR can yield partial results, because it sucks to be at the end of the quarter and you're 90% there with the rollout of something and you scored 0 just because your OKR is badly written. And last one, they need to be easy to understand for people that don't have much context about your team. Because once again, OKRs are mostly for alignment and communication, other than tracking, of course. So it's very important, and they are accessible to people like, coming from other parts of the organizations or manager higher up the chain. They really don't know all the nitty-gritty details about what you're doing, but they kind of know more or less what you are. So that's very important, that they are kind of easy to understand for everyone in the company.
That's a great answer. Aniela?
Yeah, I think that Antonio gave a very good description on how they are effective. And a lot of the teams are learning about this along the time. So I've never seen a team that is doing them right from the start. But one of the things that's it's super, super important is that the goal is very clear. Everybody understands it. The value that it brings, it's super clear to everybody inside the team. So if you're in a cross-functional team, as the team in OLX, everybody inside needs to understand exactly what it is. So that it means that you need to set the objective in a way that it's focused on the value that it delivers. And then, of course, it's to clearly define the key results and then to track them along the way. Because if you don't track them, then you get at the end, and you might fail because of that. And another thing that it's also super important is because OKRs are stretched. So that's the whole part of this, that they need to be ambitious. So, but the teams need to define what is achievable and what is the stretch part of them. So if they can reach the objective at the end, they know exactly what are the things they were pushing them a little bit higher than that it was expected. Because if they don't do that, they can lose also the confidence from the other people that are looking at the OKRs, since, as Antonio said, they are visible to everybody else. And another thing is also to make sure to identify if they're like interlinking between teams, or there are things that are depending from other teams, to make sure that that part is tracked in the part that it's really achievable, the part that the team is committing to achieve no matter what.
Excellent. How about you, Whitney?
Well, I think the biggest challenge we had with setting up OKRs and knowing if they were good is a lack of distinction between an OKR and a KPI, which is a key performance indicator, and can really be any metric or thing you're trying to track. So we would set up a lot of our OKRs, and they would be business as usual metrics or guardrails we wanted to have in place, like keeping our bug count low or addressing tech debt, things like that. That's what I mean when I say business as usual. So making sure that we classify those business as usual metrics as KPIs, are the things that keep everything from going off the rails, uh, versus OKRs, which are what we want to change. This is what keeps things moving forward. So making that distinction helps us, or helps me better understand what's a good OKR versus what might be a KPI.
That's a really useful distinction, and I think a lot of companies have trouble teasing that out, and they're just like, this is a framework for defining what it is we want to do, and maintenance stuff is not the same as stretch stuff. And if we measure them the same, then we incentivize perverse behavior sometimes. So on that note, Whitney, what makes an OKR not work? Like, tell me about an OKR that you've seen fail.
Oh, just one.
Well, just one for now.
the the most glaringly obvious, maybe, is that we don't want to acknowledge is that it's the wrong objective. Um, and I think when we get in the mindset of establishing our OKRs, maybe at the beginning of the year or the beginning of a quarter, we become very fixed on them, and want to hit all of our key results in order to achieve that objective, no matter what, by any means necessary, without sometimes taking a step back and understanding first if they're the right key results that will get us to the objective. And second, if this is the right objective worthy of doing it all. So when I've seen OKRs fail is when those questions weren't repeatedly asked of the team throughout the quarter. We didn't sort of remove ourselves from the trees to see the forest. And we failed on the objective because, it's funny enough, we might have achieved it, but it didn't get us anywhere. So I've seen the most failure in establishing the wrong objective or key results to meet that objective.
Excellent. How about you, Aniela? Tell us about a time you've seen an OKR fail.
Yeah, again, I think there are like many ways that we can fail setting or measuring or the OKRs, and a lot of the times what I've seen is that they can fail if it's very late, or you track them very late during the time that you're doing the OKR. So if you cannot track them from the start, then by the time that you're really able to track them correctly, it might be too late to do something. So I've seen OKRs that they had the results by the end of the quarter because maybe the how do we track it wasn't good enough. So for example, there was one example where we wanted to track the impact on the customers, but basically most of the time it was in A/B tests, so you couldn't get the impact for all the customers. So you only had like a small margin of customers that you had the reaction. When you open it for the whole, like the results weren't the same. So I think that was one of the cases that you need to really be able to track it from the beginning of the time that you're doing until the end, so you know what your progress and you can react to it.
Excellent. How about you, Antonio? Tell us a horror story.
Oh yeah, well, so I must say that fixing the way you write an OKR is easy. I mean, you go through the checklist I told you, or something else, some other recipe, and then you can write them, and they may be okay. The real problem here, and this is more or less what Aniela and Whitney said, is that from time to time you don't know well the problem space, and so you want to do something and you write something. Your understanding is A, and then halfway through or near the end you discover that it's B, right? And then it's already too late. Maybe you spend the majority of the effort trying to achieve A, and instead it was B, and there is no good solution to that. And another thing is that, in my opinion, from time to time, we forget that they are a tool, and all the deadlines that we put there ourselves are just arbitrary. So there is really no reason to cut release on the 13th of May because it's the end of the quarter. Like, if it needs 1 week more to get better, then it needs 1 week more to get better. So that's where I see OKRs fail, when people treat them as the goal instead of a proxy to the goal, as a way to measure it.
That's a really good. As we talk about needing to track things and keep your OKR up to date as you go through the quarter, let's talk about how much we've all had to pivot our OKRs in the last quarter and what it is that you're doing to help your teams understand that maybe our objectives are different. We're doing it with different resources. We're having to do a lot of sort of overhead work to get used to working in the new distributed way. So tell me a little bit about that. Let's start with Antonio.
Well, life doesn't happen quarter by quarter, I guess. So, in my opinion, it's good to change OKRs as soon as you are sure that you're changing objectives. That's important. That's life. That's how it is. Once again, there is no point in sticking to something arbitrary that we decide ourselves just for the sake of it. That said, you shouldn't change them all the time, right? Otherwise, what's the point? So it's a balance to strike. In these times, of course, I think that everyone was very understandable, and one of the best things of working at Yelp is that I work with very reasonable people. So it's everyone was super helpful and happy to change things midway to accommodate for the situation. So in my opinion, it's just a human thing, right? You just sit down, chat with a couple of people that are the more interested into your OKRs, and then you make modifications as we go.
Whitney?
This was more applicable to our team last quarter, I think, when we decided to pivot or shift directions on OKRs. We had a number of OKRs established for the quarter, but we ended up getting rid of one or two of them and not replacing them. So I say that to say there is this notion that when you find you're working towards an objective that might not be the right one, that we want to replace that objective with another. That doesn't always have to be the case. Sometimes you can just scratch them off the board, which is what our team had to do last quarter. We realized we did have constraints on resources and focus for that quarter. So we just thought it best to distill them down from 5 to 2 or something like that. It's not the exact numbers, but when we did that, we were able to focus even more on the objectives that we still had remaining for the quarter. So that, I guess, is the best example of pivoting or shifting on what we had established before for OKRs, but doing something a little different by the end of the quarter.
Aniela?
Yeah, so usually we try not to change the objective because what we try to change a lot is how we can get to that objective. So the thing that we are changing mostly is the initiative. And during this past month, where a lot of changes happened out there, also in the industry, because, for example, in my case, like we are connecting dealers that are selling cars with people that are buying cars, and right now we have a dealership that are closed. We have people that are more afraid to go out of the house. So what we like, our objective still continues to be the same. So we are trying to connect them. We try to increase this connection. We try to give the users the at least the content that they want to have, but we are changing how. So a lot of the work was done by this. So I don't know, informing them that the dealers, for example, have the place open, or they take video calls, or to facilitate the communication in another way. So we try to not really to change the main goal, because we don't know what's out there. So if I think that's the beauty part of the objectives, and you are aspiring for something, and you learn on the way how to reach that, because we cannot foresee the future, not even in a calmer time where everything is fine out there. We cannot see what's happening in 1, 2, 3 months. So we need to be ambitious and to think always on the impact, and then how we get there. We trust that our team are able to do that.
I really like that we have this North Star objective, and how we get there is part of what we need to flex, but our objectives probably aren't changing that much. So given that, let's talk about whether OKRs are a metric, or, like Antonio said, they're a proxy for what you are trying to do. How do you, once you give someone in management a statistic, a metric, it's really easy for them to believe that that's the truth on the ground, and for employees to try and hit the metric whether or not it meets the goal. And I think that's part of why we talk about objectives as part of key results. But so, Whitney, when I say, how do you know if it's the goal itself or proxy for the goal? Like, do you have a way to disambiguate that?
I like this idea of the proxy for the goal. So thank you, Antonio. I hadn't heard that before, so I'm going to be thinking about that after this panel. But yeah, I don't. Well, first, on teams that I've worked on, we don't typically set a metric or number for the objective. We do eventually set numbers or metrics for the key results themselves. So when you talk about trying to hit a number or a metric, that would be the case with the key result, but not necessarily the end goal, right? So as an example, an objective, paying very close attention to the verbs here, would be, reduce something, improve something. By what measurable amount, we tend to not specify, but the key results that would get us there, again, we do. So yeah, I don't know. I would love to hear more from Antonio about this idea of the proxy to the goal.
Yeah, go ahead and unpack that for us, Antonio.
First of all, as Whitney was saying, like, we do measure the key results. We don't measure the objective. Once again, it's like that's the part that is measurable, the key result. The objective, as Aniela said before, I think needs to be very aspirational, which is great. But once again, it's like, at least I've seen. I work in an infrastructure team. I always have worked in an infrastructure team, and at the end of the day, there is this concept for an infrastructure team that your main duty is that the infrastructure needs to stay up. Okay. So, and that's our PKI, as Whitney said before. So that's our North Star metric. Like, if the infrastructure is up, you're doing your work, you're doing your job. I disagree with that because if we don't make any change to the website ever, the website will never be down, very likely. So it's not exactly that. So that's important to have guardrails. That's important to have, a success, a criteria of success that is true and is rock solid. But at the same time, OKRs help you out planning the future, making changes. And But once again, they're just a tool to do that. They're not the only way. We have product manager who helps out with release plans or to understand what the people would use. We have surveys going around trying to gather ideas and trying to understand if people are using our products in the way that they are supposed to, in the way we thought about. And all these things, they don't go into OKRs, but they are goals themselves. They are a way for us to measure success. So that's why I keep on saying OKRs are a tool, OKR is a proxy, because you can nail down your OKR and your company can go burst. Like, it's possible. I'm pretty sure it should happen, but I'm pretty sure that it's possible.
Thank you. Aniela?
Yeah, when I think about the OKRs, they are impact driven. They are impact driven. So whatever you do it, if it's a proxy, if it's a goal, I think the part that it's super important is how to measure impact. And if you measure the impact on your colleagues or you measure the impact on the customers, I think that they are all valuable. So, for example, there was a team that started to decouple the front end of one of the pages, and they were like the first team doing that. And they were like, okay, that's a good initiative, but how do you measure, how do you know that this is meaningful also for the rest? So when they had to design the OKRs, they also designed what will be the impact on the user. So in terms of performance, for example, or what are the other benefits that the users will have, but then what were the impact on the rest of the team? So how they could onboard the rest of the teams, how they could help the rest of the teams to do or to continue in the same path that they were doing. So for me, that's the main thing. It's impact-driven goals.
That's great. So we have time to take like a couple questions from the audience, and then we're going to be in the channel. I think it's I don't remember which channel it's in, but we'll be in the Slack channel afterwards to help answer more specific questions. But in the meantime, I think Adam's going to post a question for us. Maybe not. Oh, we're going to be answering questions in the Effective Teams channel. So thank you. So first question, how do you create OKRs specifically for developers? So far, I've only found meaningful OKRs at a cross-functional level where product managers, designers, and developers all contribute, but I haven't found a way to measure or set goals for individual contribution. Aniela, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I can. I think that the part that I was also explaining before, it's to measure also what is the impact that your action will have, and by that it's easier to set also something for yourself. But usually I don't like to use OKRs for like for individuals, because we don't like to, like, OKRs are something that are aspirational. So you want to do every time you want to do better, you want to push yourself. And if it's something that you're using, I don't know, for performance, that maybe you are going to play a little bit more safe, because it's something that depends, your career depends on that, or your bonuses or something like that. So usually what we do, and I think that it works, is to separate the individual objective and then the OKRs that are run for the whole team.
Excellent. It looked like you had something to add to that, Whitney. How do you set OKRs for developers?
That was okay. I completely agree.
That's great. So one more question. Can we hear a couple examples of OKRs that you would consider effective? Just, the high level, maybe just the objective, but like what kind of key result might support that? Antonio?
You can find a couple examples on the blog post I was telling you before. But for example, one kind of KR that I've seen working kind of fine, when usually the objective is like, I don't know, improve the performance of this thing or make this thing very fast, right? Something like that. They're kind of like SLO styles OKR. For example, 99% of the requests for this endpoint have been served under 300 milliseconds, something like that. And usually they kind of collect a constellation of initiatives, like, caching or improving the code base or changing the way the logic works of the service. So that's very cool because it's like the goal is that and it doesn't tell you anything about to get there. Another one that I liked was stuff that was like incremental. For example, when we try to build a new platform, what we try to achieve is onboarding X users to beta, onboard Y user to general availability. And that gives, since every user has their own requirement, it gives us a good idea or how well the platform is evolving and how much the new use cases are covered. So the more people we can onboard, the more the platform is growing well. So these kind of OKRs are the one that I like, honestly.
All right, Whitney, do you have a quick one for us?
Yeah. So I'll use one from my team. We work on email at Medium. So if you receive your daily digest in your inbox, that's from our team. And so success for us is helping more people find more good stories to read on Medium, right? So that's a very clear objective that we want to achieve. And then the results that would indicate that got us there are things like improving our success rate by a certain metric, improving our open rate of the emails, things like that. Just to call out the distinction, objectives we don't necessarily have complete control over. So part of this whole process is relinquishing that control, right? You don't know if you're going to hit this objective or not, because COVID-19, right, like can come and completely change the roadmap for you. So the objective we don't have much control over, but we do want to have some control over the level of effort for our key results, right? Those are all things we want to be able to drive. And I'm not saying how we do it, but we do want to have that within our control. So things like open rate, we can directly impact, whether or not we get classified as spam by certain things that we do, right? Our success rate, even in the quality of the stories that we provide in the digest, things like that. So having complete control over the level of effort for our key results, and then hoping that maps to successful outcomes of our objectives.
Excellent. Panel, this has been awesome. I wish we had more time, but we're going to have a conversation in the Effective Teams channel. Antonio has a blog post that he will post about OKRs. Whitney has a great talk about bottom-up OKRs. Aniela, just as a last thought, is there anything that you've published that you'd like to point to?
Not really, but if I do, I will short tweet about it.
All right. Thank you. And thank you all for your time and attention.